Greetings, Fresh Hellions. I'm here with my old friend, Vicky Ward, who, along with the great James Patterson, has just published a gripping book. It's called The Idaho Four, and it's about the quadruple murder at the University of Idaho in November 2022 of 4 students, in which Brian Kohberger, a creepy criminology PhD student at the nearby Washington State University, slaughtered these friends, 4 of them, as they slept in their shared off-campus home. It's a gripping book. I was just telling Vicky that, I had planned to skim it, and I didn't. I read every word and skipped a night of Netflix and kept going. It's a really compelling sort of in cold bloody kind of read. So I'm delighted to be talking to my friend Vicky. Hello, Vicky.
Hi, Tina. It's so nice to talk to you.
Okay.
And it's really rewarding to hear you, of everyone, say you love the book. And
I did. I really did. It's certainly the best book I think that you've done, and you've done a number. So, let's start first of all with, the most recent news, the shock plea deal, right? We were all sitting there waiting for this trial that was, I think, going to be in August. But then this plea deal in which Kohberger suddenly confessed, said he did it all. And of course, that was mostly to avoid the death sentence, which is a good motivation. But they had such a strong case, and they had his DNA at the crime scene on the sheath of the knife in which he slaughtered the girls. So why do you think they did go this route?
Of having him at the 11th hour plead guilty?
Yes.
Because, his defense counsel, public defender, Ann Taylor, actually very, very, very good lawyer, had exhausted all their options. She spent, to her credit, actually, if you think of how she pushed back this trial, we were coming to trial almost 3 years after the murders took place, and she'd successfully pushed it back and pushed it back. She'd changed the venue, and she'd spent a long time trying to argue that the DNA evidence would be inadmissible because it used this technique called IgG, investigative genetic genealogy. And it turned out that actually at the end, the labs went to websites where customers had not given permission for the data to be used. But there is a loophole in the law that states that the FBI is allowed to use their discretion when they go through websites like that. So she had kind of lost that argument. And then there was all this talk of an alibi. Well, the alibi never really seemed to produce anything other than he was stargazing.
Right. And then that was incredible. He used to drive around at night in his car. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then, there was talk that also went nowhere, that it was actually somebody else. The police hadn't looked at somebody else. That all disappeared. And I think, at the end of the day, she was out of options. The DNA, we do know, the book lays out the tick-tock of that investigation. And until the police got the DNA, they really were clutching at straws. Brian Kohberger was very, very clever. He knew what he was doing. The DNA was his only mistake. They never found the murder weapon. He cleaned up his car and his apartment. And he was very clever how, because he had Pennsylvania license plates, it meant he didn't have to have one on the front of the car. So they couldn't get a clear picture of the car. And so till the DNA results came through and they got a name, they really didn't have him. They certainly didn't have him when he and his dad drove back across country, and they were stopped a couple of times by the police. People assumed, well, that must have meant that, the FBI hadn't. They didn't. They only got him when the lab came back and showed that they put together a family tree, and it seemed clear that the most likely member of that family to have been anywhere near the murder scene was the guy who'd been at university a 10-minute drive away. And then they could put the video of the car, the security camera footage of the highways that showed his car leaving at 4 a.m. Then they could go into everyone's, obviously then they arrested him matched
Well, and
his
they had that fascinating thing where they staked out his house in Pennsylvania, were watching how at 4 o'clock in the morning, wearing gloves, he put out his trash in the neighbor's trash can, which was
right.
also very smart of him, except that, of course, they were watching and found that the trash had his DNA on it. So that was his one
But
mistake.
it actually, Tina, it didn't. This was what was so fascinating. It had his father's. They only got his DNA when they actually executed the Dawn raid and swabbed his cheek. I mean, he knew what he was about. He was a criminology
Right.
PhD student.
Right. I know that. I mean, so in fact, what I found, what's sort of gratifying in the book is that the cops, in Moscow, Idaho, were constantly sort of were maligned essentially as being like these hokey, rube cops who were clearly not up to this great, detective work. But actually, they did brilliant detective work and had the discipline, which you, as you paint, was really hard with the press coming at them, day after day, night after night. Like, what have you got, and why aren't you giving us anything? And they knew that they weren't going to give this criminology student any clue as to what they were up to. So it was actually really a gratifying sort of reward for these local cops, which is often not true. Of course, one of the biggest agonies, though, of this plea deal is what we'll never get unless it all comes out post, whether in fact, one question I want to ask you was like, can we get all this information now the trial is over? But what was the motive for Brian Kohberger's crime? And that is obviously what we all hope to get, from cross-examination, a deeper sense of this very strange, obsessed, fanatical. I mean, there's something very sinister about Kohberger. I
Yeah.
mean, he's like a sort of angel of death, with his sort of thin, cadaverous face and his bulging eyes, and yet there he was, teaching a criminology class as a TA, getting a PhD in criminology. So, what do you feel? What did you really feel was his motive in this horrendous crime?
Well, I definitely came to believe, we saw several important scenes, I think, from his teenage years that I think are instructive. There's that scene in the book when he's addicted to heroin, and so is the guy who was kind of his only real friend, a guy who was popular and an athlete, a guy called Jeremy Saber. Jeremy Saber gets arrested for the first time and is in jail, and a teenage Brian Kohberger phones up his mum, who's been nothing but kind to this guy who's a loner and a misfit and all the rest of it, and says, "When are you visiting Jeremy? I'd like to come too." So she tells him, "Oh, tomorrow at 11." And instead of going to visit his only friend, he uses that opportunity to break in to her house and steal from her to pay for his drug habit. And she knows it was him because a couple of years later, he shows up in her kitchen unannounced to apologize because he's going through rehab, and atonement is part of the process. And another guy, a former Navy SEAL, walked me through his woods, and he lives in a very remote piece of property in the Poconos. And he put it together when Kohberger was arrested. He had wondered for years who had been stalking him and his house, leaving wrapping of sweet wrappings in his woods, and then stealing knives and prescription meds and jewelry from him. And when he saw Kohberger's picture on the news, he was like, "Oh my God, it's him." He had been playing airsoft with his son and his nephew in the woods. So you right there, you see that Kohberger was manipulative and calculated. You also see him, which the book takes you into the classroom when he was an undergraduate at DeSales University studying serial murderers, spree murderers. We know that he watched the video of this guy, Elliot Rodger, who was a privileged college student in Santa Barbara in 2014. He was a virgin, even though he was sort of a privileged, reasonable looking guy, actually. He never...
Yeah, he was the son of a film producer, wasn't he?
British film producer who'd worked on the Star Wars movies. And he never had success with women. And so he wrote a sort of biography of his sad life, and he made some videos sitting in his BMW with the sun dropping behind him in the Santa Barbara Hills, saying that he was now going to go out and take revenge on the sorority women who'd rejected him. And he sent this video to his therapist, who sent it to his mother 2 minutes before he went out, and did exactly that, and wound up killing, injuring 16 people, and eventually himself. He becomes something of a cult hero in what they call the incel movement, involuntary celibate movement.
It's really fascinating, because it does seem that he did forge a deep connection with Elliot Rodgers, as you say. I mean, and I actually completely forgotten that case. I mean, I know that it became a big sort of, thing amongst the incel community, but I didn't realize until I read your book that it had also inspired, in the same way that sort of jihadi videos inspire. There's actually become this kind of iconic crime that is sort of watched by other incels, and obviously the fact that he was so identified with it means that it was this sexual frustration, essentially, this rage at rejection that made him, so angry with women. Because, I mean, tell us about how, as a TA, he did exhibit a great deal of misogyny, didn't he?
Right. And I think, this is one of the things that the families were hoping to learn more about at trial, if there had been one. They did want to know what had gone on at Washington State University, because clearly there were red flags. And what had been missed. So, yes, I mean, he was misogynistic and creepy, both in the classroom and outside of it, to the point that it really cost him his teaching position, which was his only means of funding his PhD. So by the time of the murders, he had kind of nothing left to lose. He'd blown himself up because of his behavior towards women. So not in the class with his own peers, he would roll his eyes and mansplain and interrupt the women in a way that was so offensive that some of them walked out of the class. He followed some of his students out of the door. He followed one of them to a car. He graded the women selectively badly in a way that they then went to the administration and complained. And I think almost the creepiest scene in the book is when a classmate of his, a guy, finds himself stuck in a car with him because he accepts a lift from Kohberger, and Kohberger decides to explain his views of women and says, I could walk into a bar anywhere and get any woman I want. I could just pick her up and have her. And this poor guy, Ben Roberts, gets stuck with him. And he says, I don't think women belong on campus. They should be, in the bedroom and in the kitchen. And actually, Ben Roberts, this guy, becomes more and more concerned about Kohberger's obvious sort of physical and mental deterioration, that he actually, a week before the murders, starts to type this form, this care form that he wants to send in to the administration so that somebody can look at Kohberger's mental health. And something about Kohberger is so creepy to him that he deletes it, because he thinks if he ever finds out who sent in this form, there'd be trouble. And that obviously is a terrible, terrible moment. The victims' families and friends don't believe that Kohberger was going after all four. They do believe that.
Where did you get that from? Because I've actually not read anywhere except in your book that that you believe that it was Maddie Mogan, one of the very pretty blondes that he killed.
Yes,
that was his target. And I wondered sort of where you got that from, and also why he therefore went on and murdered the other three, including one of the male students.
Yeah. So several reasons. One is that on the digital footprint that's in the court record, is that we know that he slipped into sort of the DMs of all of them, but the person who he targeted most online was Maddie Mogan, and so he liked some of the pictures with Kaylee Gonzalez in them, but they're only ones that she's in them with Maddie. Maddie is the clear, I think, focus online. And it's interesting, I went and sat in a car where Kohberger would have parked his car behind that house on King Road in Moscow when it was still standing. There's only one bedroom you can see clearly from the road, and it is Maddie Mogan's, and he would have known it was Maddie Mogan's because it had a name in the window and her pink cowboy boots. And I went with a young woman who was a great friend of them all and who lived next door, and she would come out every night to her car parked in that same place. And she would smile to herself because the lights would all be blazing. And you could see Maddie very clearly at her vanity, putting on her makeup, curling her hair, whatever. And, obviously never occurred to anyone that there was somebody staring back at her from, behind the trees in the road with nefarious motive. But the other reason that the friends and the families really believe it was Maddie was because he went straight on the night of the murders to her room. I think a lot of people don't realize that Kaylee Gonzalez had completely left the house by then. Her stuff wasn't there. She had packed up. She was living at home, ready to start a job in Texas. So it was complete random tragic chance that she was there that night. She had literally driven back to show Maddie her new car. And it was it had been a big football game day on campus. And that is the only reason she was there.
And she was sleeping in the bed with her friend, which he wouldn't have expected. But then he still went on and killed Xana, her other friend, and Ethan, who were on a different floor. Why would he do that?
Well, because he had to come down. So he had to come. So Maddie and Kaylee were on the top floor. He went straight to Maddie's room. In order to leave the house, he had to come down. And unfortunately, Xana's bedroom he would have had to have gone past it. And unfortunately, as we know, Xana Kernodle was still up. She was up and about because she had received a DoorDash delivery. And so there's no question that they sort of ran into each other. And we know this because tragically, the way Xana was found by Hunter Johnson the next day, she was not in her bed. She had fallen backwards into the bedroom, having clearly fought. I mean, that you talk of, hand wounds on her hands. She had fallen back and was lying sort of face up, feet first. Ethan Chapin was sound asleep in bed, facing the wall. And, one has to assume he was a gentle giant of a guy, very tall guy. And one assumes that Kohberger just saw immediately, even though there's no evidence that Ethan Chapin did anything except say fast asleep facing the opposite direction. But one assumes Kohberger saw immediately how big he was and that was too risky to leave him alive. But as it has been explained to me by law enforcement, why then? Because then he has to go down again past Dylan Mortenson's room and she sees him. But
he doesn't kill her.
Right. But she, remember, is not standing out. She's got her door open a crack and is able, she keeps opening and closing the door. And as has been explained to me, that it's actually very physically exhausting to stab for people. And for someone, especially in a short amount of time like that, and it would have all happened so quickly that, as was explained to me by various people sort of close to the investigation, it didn't surprise them that, he's already dealt with three more people than he'd expected. And then this last one on his way out is, she would have been able to close her door in his face. So, and there's this very strange description from Dylan that he was holding something that looked like a black vacuum. So he also had something in his hands. Now, what that was, I'm not sure we'll ever find out.
There was no evidence that they had been sort of concussed first and then stabbed. They were stabbed right away.
No, and in fact, it's one line in the book, but the Gonzalez family have since come out. It's clear that sort of Kaylee woke up, which is why there were many more wounds on her body than on Maddie's. And obviously, Xana had a struggle. But no, there's definitely more. And again, this is why, the families, I think one of the themes in the book, you do see, this is Idaho. It's a liberal college town in a Republican state. There are divisions in the town, and there are divisions among the victims' families as to how they view the system of justice and law enforcement.
Yes,
you
because
have
I
the
think
tape.
two lots of parents were okay with the plea deal and the other two weren't. I mean, I was struck by Kaylee's mother, who said, if your 21-year-old daughter was sleeping in her bed, stabbed many times and beaten in the face and head while she fought for her life, what would you want? And I understand. I mean, you'd want to know everything about that night, painful and horrible though it was. But I guess there are
Yeah.
other parents who feel the reverse.
Well, and I think that the Gonzalez family also feel it was the speed at which the plea deal happened. I think that, they've said to me that if 6 months ago they had there had been conversations about this, then I think they would have felt, well, let's have a real conversation. Let's feel like we're stakeholders in this and that our opinion matters. But the reason they're so upset is I think they feel, and they felt the whole way through, that nobody really cares very much about them. That's the way our justice system works is that the suspect is given all sorts of rights. He's allowed to wear a suit. He's allowed to have the trial pushed back, the trial delayed, and ultimately he's allowed to get out of the death penalty. And I think they feel, well, do we have no? I mean, it has felt to them like they have no voice, and they also, I mean, the Olivia, Kaylee's older sister, said to me, there's no guidebook for when something like this happens to you, and the police and the prosecutors go out of their way to protect the investigation. That's what they've been trained to do. But it's deeply, deeply frustrating for the families who are left. I mean, I was really sort of stunned to discover that they knew really not much more than I did. I mean, there were days that Steve Gonzalez said to me, "You know what? I'm learning more from you, Vicky, than I've learned from the prosecutors. It's extraordinary."
Yeah, agony for them, actually, really agony. What did you learn about Kohberger's own family background? I mean, I know they've been very silent.
Yeah.
You know, there was another brother, I gather, who died from heroin. So clearly, this was a family that had been through a lot of troubles.
Right. But and there is that scene towards the end of the book where a year ago, Michael Kohberger, Brian's father, runs into this woman who, back in the day, Brian stole from, the mother of his only friend, and he says, "Oh, Brian didn't do it," and clearly this woman doesn't believe him. But all my reporting suggested, actually, Tina, that and this is what's so tragic about it, that the parents did their best.
Mm.
There are two sisters who don't seem to have had any of the sort of pathological problems that Brian Kohberger did. I mean, clearly, Marianne Kohberger, his mother, did complain to Connie Saba, her neighbor, that clearly Brian Kohberger was on the spectrum, and she didn't feel that there was support for that in the school system, which, many parents, I think, will relate to.
Completely, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
and it happens again and again that you hear the parents, I tried to get him help. I knew there was something wrong. I went from doctor to doctor, and it happens again and again. The lack of any kind of mental health sort of support for parents, essentially, in these situations is something that is leading to enormous amount of tragedies.
Right. And we do know that Brian Kohberger's dad turned him into the police for stealing his sister's cell phone. So one doesn't get the sense that these parents were neglectful parents. I mean, and we also know, because Brian talked about it when he was an undergraduate, that his mother made him go to, Bible study. So, I mean, one gets the sense that these parents actually did their best, which I think makes it all the more tragic. I mean, and there's no question, we're all familiar with kids and young men. They're on the spectrum. This is the age of the internet. They don't have social skills. They're loners by nature. And then, so they sit in their rooms, and, there are more young guys than not at this point whose only experience of women is online.
Well, and also, I mean, what I found very vivid in your book is, and very contemporary in a sense, was the way these girls, who were sort of lovely, sweet, kind of bubbly campus party girls, really, they lived out their life on Instagram, didn't they? I mean,
Yep.
they were constantly posting pictures of themselves having fun, this agonizing, out of touch world for Brian Kohberger, a world that he lusted to be part of, and never could be, was part of his angst, wasn't it? That he could constantly see this out of touch wonder world of beautiful blondes partying with their brown legs. I mean, they were very, very pretty girls, these girls. I mean, they were sort of classic American campus girls. It was like something out of a movie to look at these pictures, and the very handsome Ethan and Holt. I mean, they were very, very a sort of attractive bunch. You've obviously became quite sort of intimately, sort of sourced up with James Fry, the police chief.
Yeah.
I mean, what was the moment for him, do you think, that was the sort of aha moment when he knew that Kohberger was his guy?
So it's around the 20th of December. So finally, I think by the time Christmas came, James Fry was feeling optimistic for the first time in weeks. And actually, it's funny. He talks to the camera on at the end of December, and it's hours before the other side of the country, the FBI is getting ready to bust into the Kohberger family home, and James Fry gives one last press conference, not actually from the police station, but in his office to the camera, sort of giving the local update. And once I knew after all the reporting I'd done, that what he knew, you can see that the smallest smile on his face actually as he's giving that press conference. But yeah, it was very interesting listening to him, because he did everything he'd been trained to do, which was to say as little as possible and to protect the investigation and not tip Brian Kohberger off. And what he learned was that in the modern world, you can't do that, because the true crime mania in this country is now so intense that into this void come all these really, really harmful speculative theories. And they almost become, the fake narrative almost becomes the real narrative. And the police then have to waste their time clearing all sorts of people who had absolutely nothing to do with the murders.
Not to mention the smearing of the victims, essentially. And, suddenly the victims are becoming sort of wild party girls who kind of brought this upon themselves, etc., which is that agony for the parents too.
Right. And the parents are left there with nothing to clutch onto except this fake narrative. And they're left trying to then use the same tools, social media and the internet, to protect the narrative and the identities of their children. You have the best friends who are already dealing with the shock and fear in those next 6 weeks. So whoever did this was now coming for them. And then they look on their, public social media accounts and they discover they're being accused of being the murderer. Yeah, the college professor who had to get security for her young family. And you had the guy who ran the bagel store who nearly went bust.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, it's horrendous. Well, of course, speaking of, crime mania jumping into vacuums, can we just switch to another creep, who happened to either be murdered or commit suicide, depending which way you look at it, namely Jeffrey Epstein, about whom you also know a great deal, because, of course, you made that gripping documentary, Chasing Ghislaine, about Ghislaine Maxwell. So just really wanted to ask you, what do you think that Trump is so afraid of in these Epstein files? Why, after all of the hype about releasing them and knowing that MAGA is utterly obsessed with this case in a way, what is he afraid of, in your view?
That's a really great question, Tina, because I've been because and this is again speculative, but we know that there are very wealthy guys who Trump definitely knows, who were in the money orbit around Epstein. And that's sort of the only, because it doesn't really make any sense on the face of it, because Trump, we know, palled around with Epstein, but so did many, many, many bold-faced names, particularly in New York. And he fell out with Epstein. It's not clear to me why he won't just come out and be transparent about that, because my understanding from Sam Nunberg, who was his political advisor in 2014 and 2015, which was when Virginia Roberts Giuffre came forward and joined the class action suit with the other victims, which is really what was at the heart of what eventually caught up with Jeffrey Epstein in 2019. Trump said to Sam Nunberg, I stopped talking to Epstein when he went after the daughter of a member at Mar-a-Lago. And that's, according to Trump, telling his own political advisor.
Which puts him in a good light, actually.
Well, exactly. So why not come out and deal with that? It's sort of, I am scratching my head about it. But we do know that there are men, powerful rich men, whose names have been mentioned by various of the victims, and they've kind of been written out of the narrative. And so the question is, does Trump feel beholden to any of them for any reason? I don't know. I mean, to me, I don't understand why he just wouldn't come out and say, let me tell you about my history with this guy.
Well, yes, and also, of course, he's always willing to kick people to the curb if it serves his own cause. So,
Exactly.
It's not like a guy who stays, quote, loyal to friends. I mean, people, I think, tend to estimate the money part. They're obsessed with the sex part. I mean, as we know, Epstein was a crook, essentially. I mean, and it seems like that we'll never know quite what he was doing with all of these people's money when he got it, but it seems like there was a classic sort of course that he was running where he was like able to hide money for people, able to avoid taxes for people, able to launder money for people. There was definitely this whole money part of the scandal that was as damaging to some as the pedophilia part was to others. And that's what's interesting about the web around Epstein, essentially, is there were many people caught up in that web for different reasons. I mean, some were about money, some were about sex, some were about sex and money. And of course, once he had that material on you, you were in his thrall. I mean, if you'd had him hide your money, he owns you, essentially, because
that's exactly right.
Yeah. So, I mean, is there, I wonder, any part of that aspect of it and I did actually wonder whether for Trump there might be some leverage in knowing those names and not releasing them. I mean, it's great. It's great compromise,
Yes, it is. It is. And I mean, you're so right. I mean, I'm still puzzled by the whole, why on earth would Leon Black, one of the richest men in the country, pay Jeffrey Epstein rather than Sullivan and Cromwell, 160 million plus for quote unquote tax advice? It doesn't make sense. And the other thing that's always really puzzled me is why Leslie Wexner, supposedly Jeffrey Epstein's great benefactor through the 1990s, the man who finances the house, the island, all of it, finally in 2019, after Jeffrey Epstein's death, sticks his hand up and says, well, Jeffrey Epstein stole from me. I mean, I've always felt
well, I mean, he writes that letter to the Wall Street Journal and says that he stole over 40 million. But hey, Leslie Wexner, you never prosecuted him.
No, and Jeffrey.
I mean, it's not like sort of finding that somebody who is being really close to you has been ripping you off to the tune of 10 grand or something. I mean, that's a lot of money, right?
Yes.
And so why didn't he ever prosecute him? I mean, was it in fact? Who knows why? I mean, and Epstein never said anything about it. I mean, it was just like, what happened about that money? Why and why was there no?
Well, but Epstein said to me way back in 2002 that when rich people get defrauded, they don't go to the authorities because it's embarrassing. So Epstein understood that psychology. Epstein did understand the psychology of the people around him very, very well. And he was, as you say, I think he was a great con artist. And that aspect of his personality always gets sort of overlooked.
Well, it does. I mean, there's no doubt, as our great mutual late friend, Edward J. Epstein, wrote that wonderful piece, because he knew him in his early years. And there was just a litany of sort of petty conmanship at the beginning of his career, before he became the great Jeffrey Epstein. He was conning people out of 70 grand here and 70 grand there. So he was at heart a con man. I mean, an absolutely dyed-in-the-wool con man. I'm also fascinated, though, because you have studied Ghislaine and knew her, as we both did, at length. Um, why did she never cough up any info on Jeffrey and what she knew that would have helped her save her own skin? I mean, she had I can't believe she knew nothing that would be of value to the prosecutors. And there she is serving in a Tallahassee prison in Florida, a 20-year sentence. It is interesting that the only person who went to prison, P.S., is a woman. That none of these powerful men did go to prison, but she, who did not have a great fortune and who was part of this, is the one who ended up with a 20-year prison sentence. I mean, she certainly deserved to be punished for her horrendous, procuring of young women to Epstein, but it's a long sentence, and it seems as if she hasn't bargained anything she knew to get that sentence down. Do you have any understanding of why that might be, Vicky?
Yeah. So I think several things. I think, again, come back to the way the system of law works in the country. The government only brings cases it thinks it can win. And so after Jeffrey Epstein died, I think they having sat through Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, they had a very clear case where they had victims who were prepared to go on the record and make very compelling arguments in court. And they kept the case against Ghislaine Maxwell very, very, very narrow. It was about the sex crimes. And so it was quite frustrating in some ways sitting there, because you could see that the sex crimes were part of a bigger jigsaw puzzle, but you weren't able to go down, and nor was the jury able to see the other pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. And you couldn't really get a sense of the whole picture. We do know that, Alan Dershowitz, who was one of Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers, went on record when I made Chasing Ghislaine, saying that when Virginia Giuffre came out and accused Alan Dershowitz of being someone she'd been pimped out to by Jeffrey Epstein, he was determined to fight that, which he ultimately did successfully. But that Jeffrey Epstein had said to him, no, please, can you keep this quiet, and I'll pay for this, for Virginia Roberts. I'll pay hush money, and I'll pay for it to go away. And, and all these other guys were quite happy for Jeffrey Epstein to pay hush money and make this all go away. And so Alan Dershowitz's point, I think, is that because there were all these settlements, a lot of this has then not come back to court. Ghislaine Maxwell's mistake, if you want to call it that, was that she got legally embroiled with Virginia Giuffre, and it was the discovery in that civil litigation, which was ultimately settled, that really led to the government's case, first against Jeffrey Epstein, but then against her.
So why would she now not say, use this? And I mean, she must know what's in those files, you would think. I mean, perhaps not. I mean, we know that Jeffrey Epstein also lived a hugely compartmentalized life in which he had all these secret things going along. But you can't believe that Ghislaine doesn't have info that would be.
I'm sure she does. She does. But I think my point is that if there have been settlements between other victims and other men, and if then those victims aren't now going to raise their hand again, the government's probably limited in what it can do. And I think that I'm not sure there was ever a deal on offer for her. I think the government wanted to win that case. And Jeffrey Epstein was dead. So whatever she had was at that point of limited value. Now, maybe ironically, less so.
Yeah, but her critical mistake was not turning him in before he died. I mean, her critical mistake was to have him out there and arrested on that plane with it not being her tip-off, essentially. I mean, she should have sold Epstein up the river a couple of years before to protect herself, correct? I mean, instead of which she didn't, and maybe out of fear.
Yes.
I mean, the other thing is that, we don't know who is the scary, threatening people that would stop her from doing that. I mean, she is not a woman with a massive fortune. So
No.
obviously is much less protected than these billionaires with huge legal firms behind them and so on. I mean, she doesn't have the wherewithal essentially to sort of protect herself like they do. So in that sense, she blew it
Right.
and misjudged, which is really quite ironic. Well, look, we could talk for hours, Vicky.
Yeah.
This has been great. As always, you have wonderful things to say, and of course, you have your Substack, Vicky Ward Investigates, which is required reading now that I'm in that realm myself. So I think the book is going to roar to the top of the bestseller list, the Idaho book, and hope you will keep doing these incredible investigations on crime because no one does it more vividly. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tina. Thank you so much.
All right. See you soon. Bye.